The fracture was not gone, but the remembering was louder. The stars did not fade that night. They moved, slowly, deliberately, like a constellation shifting its bones. Each one bent toward a single point in the sky, the place where Elara's final tone had vanished. The elders turned their faces upward. Even Memory, who had seen the rise and fall of countless worlds, looked awed. The night above them had become a living compass. "They are answering," Memory whispered. "The architects have heard." A hush fell so deep it silenced even thought. The air trembled, thickening until light began to gather inside it. A slow spiral forming above the hill, bright as dawn, yet pulsing like a heartbeat. Elara took a step forward. Every instinct said kneel. Every thread of her being said remember. The spiral widened, lowering toward the earth until its center opened like an eye made of geometry and music. Within it stood a presence woven of symmetry itself, a being tall as mountain air, robed in currents of living gold. "One of the architects," Form breathed. Their angular cloak folded into a bow, as did Memory's ever-shifting head. The being spoke without mouth or sound. Its voice arrived as vibration that rearranged the atoms around them. The grass straightened, the trees leaned inward, the mirror behind them glowed like a second moon. "The repair has begun," the architect said, "but the resonance must be anchored, or the lattice will sing itself apart." Elara's pulse raced. "Anchored? How?" The architect turned its gaze upon her. When its eyes met hers, she felt every lifetime ripple through her, not in sequence, but all at once, every joy, every sorrow, every moment of forgetting and remembering. The sum of her existence became one long, sustained note. "The harmony you restored cannot survive without a witness within it," the architect continued. "One must remain inside the lattice to tune its frequencies as they shift. Without such a being, creation will drift back into dissonance." Elara understood the words before they were finished. This was not an ending. It was an offering. The elders stepped closer. Form's geometry glowed soft silver. Memory's pages turned to light. "You are not chosen by command," Memory said gently. "You are invited by resonance. The song recognizes its own singer." Elara's breath shook. "If I enter the lattice again, will I come back?" Form hesitated. "Not as you were, but your frequency will echo through every soul that remembers. In that way, you will be more present than ever." Elara looked at the mirror. Its surface now pulsed with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The light inside it shimmered in shapes she almost recognized. Circles within circles, spirals that looked like breathing. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. The architect extended a hand, long, luminous fingers made of intersecting light lines. "Readiness is not a state of ease," it said. "It is the willingness to align." Behind her, the elders bowed their heads. The wind carried scents of rain and cedar. Somewhere far below the hill, the city slept beneath a web of dim stars, every soul unaware that their world balanced on this single breath. The elder of memory spoke first. "If you go, you will see beyond remembering. But before you cross, we will give you the final teaching." They stepped forward, their faceless form slowing its constant shifting until it became a stillness that seemed impossible. From that stillness, a single phrase emerged. "All stories are bridges." Elara frowned softly. "Bridges?" "Between silence and sound," Memory said. "Between what is and what wants to be. You thought this story was about your awakening. It was never only yours, it was ours. The lattice tells itself through the willing." Form spoke next, tracing a circle in the air that hung like a ring of moonlight between them. "Every world needs an anchor, something to remind it what harmony feels like. You will become that reminder, not by speaking, but by being the vibration itself," until her voice felt gilded. It was as if the lattice was already tuning her. "But what happens to me?" she asked softly. "You will dissolve," Form said. "Not into nothing, into everything." A silence followed that felt holy. Elara looked at her hands. They shimmered faintly, veins filled with slow-moving light. She thought of the people she had met, the man with the radio scar, the grieving woman in the hospital, the market circle humming beneath rain. Each one was a thread. Each one carried her light. Maybe that was the point all along, not to keep it, but to let it travel. The architect lifted both arms. Behind them, the sky opened in a vast arc of gold. The lattice itself was descending, an ocean of light threads cascading downward like gentle rain. Every sound in existence became music. The rustle of leaves, the heartbeat of the hill, even the soft inhale of the elders. Elara could see it now, the web that connected everything. Each person's soul was a filament glowing softly, all of them singing in subtle harmonies that pulsed through the world. The architect turned to her again. When one heart remembers, all hearts vibrate. When one breath chooses peace, entire worlds realign. You have proven this truth. Will you carry it forever? Tears formed in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from awe. Yes, she said, if it means the song continues. The architect's light flared brighter, surrounding her completely. She felt the pull, the same current that had first drawn her through the mirror, but this time it was not descent. It was ascent through vibration. Her body began to dissolve into light dust. The elders watched silently as her form became a constellation of gold particles suspended in air. Memory's voice trembled for the first time. When you sing from within, remember us in silence. Elara smiled. Silence is where I began. The architect extended its radiant hand again, and Elara reached toward it. Between them, a sphere of light formed. A memory, a promise, a threshold. Her fingertips brushed the sphere, and for a moment, she felt everything. Her childhood laughter. The forests of her first awakening. The mirrors turning, the lattice humming. The love she had shared and the pain she had carried. Every note of her existence perfectly tuned. She looked back one final time. The elders stood side by side, silent guardians of balance. The mirror reflected not her face now, but the faces of all who had awakened because of her story. Thousands, millions of souls glowing in small acts of kindness, forgiveness, and courage. She took the architect's hand. The moment their light met, the world ceased to be a place and became a song. The moment their light met, the world ceased to be a place and became a song. Elara did not move through the lattice. She became the space between its notes. There was no up or down, no near or far, only widening. She widened until the hill, the town, the forest, the mirror, and the sky all rested inside her like remembered rooms. She widened until the architect's hand was not a hand but a harbor, and the elders were not distant but woven into the very pitch of her becoming. Her last breath as a single body left her lips like a small bird. The lattice caught it and carried it on golden wings across creation. Where the breath flew, shadows turned translucent. Where it paused, stones remembered the patience of mountains. Where it landed, a child looked up and smiled without knowing why. Elara felt none of it as a watcher. She felt all of it as a chord. She stood, without feet, in a chamber that had no walls, only radiance. Here, threads of light converged in a soft, bright center, the heart of the lattice. Every filament that had ever hummed with life entered this place, sang its note, and carried on. The architect's presence unfolded beside her, tall and calm as geometry. The elder of memory arrived as a slow turning of constellations. The elder of form stepped through angles that opened like petals. None of them cast shadows. There was nowhere for light to fail. We begin the tuning, the architect said, and their voice rearranged silence into listening. Elara reached into herself and found there was no end. She found the thread that knew grief and plucked it gently. The tone that rose was raw but honest, and the lattice warmed as if a cold hand had been taken in both of hers. She found the thread that knew fear and did not cut it. She hummed beside it until the fear remembered it was protection grown too large. It softened, changed color, and returned to its rightful size. She found the thread called loneliness and breathed through it until it recognized its other name, longing for the whole. One by one she touched the human notes, the animal notes, the river notes, the star notes, not as a master, as a friend. The elders watched with the patience of epochs. The architect listened with the precision of dawn. She is aligning the forgotten to the remembering, memory said, pages glowing. She is giving form to what was shapeless, form added, cloak becoming circles within circles. She is not removing the silence, the architect concluded. She is teaching it to sing. It arrived like frost over glass, subtle, creeping, inevitable, the silence. Not a creature, not a mist. An old decision repeated until it mistook itself for truth. In the heart of the lattice, it looked like absence braided into thread, thin gray veins moving through gold. Where it touched a filament, color dulled. Where it lingered, memory thinned. Elara did not brace, she opened. She remembered the first time she had wanted to stop feeling. She remembered the day a doorway closed, and she told herself it had never existed. She remembered the protective lie, "If I do not name it, it cannot break me." She stepped toward the gray vein with tenderness that made the chamber ache. "I know you," she whispered, voice both small and everywhere. The silence quivered as if surprised to be addressed. "I know why you came," she continued. "You are the pact made in pain. We will forget so it does not hurt." The silence trembled. The trembling made a sound, barely, but there. A first note, shy as winter sun. Elara did not force it into brightness. She offered a tone beside it. A low human vowel that carried the warmth of kitchens and raincoats and late-night lamps, the sound of staying. The two notes met. They did not agree. They listened. The gray vein shifted toward silver, not gone, willing. "Harmony is not sameness," the architect said, as if to the chamber and to every soul that would ever hear the story. "It is difference consenting to belong." The change traveled outward. Wherever silence had sat like stone, it now sat like still water, clear enough for stars to see themselves. Elara felt the relief move through existence, the way dawn moves through windows. Far below the hill, the town changed without noticing how. People woke in the middle of the night and put the kettle on for no reason, and then realized the reason was comfort. A nurse stood at a ward sink and stared at her reflection, and instead of bracing against the next hour, let her shoulders lower, and the hour did not break her. A bus driver, seeing the spiral of chalk washed half away by rain, parked a little differently so passengers faced one another as they boarded, and three strangers exchanged the kind of nod that turns into names. On the hill, where the mirror shone like a sleeping sea, dew formed early. The ash tree's leaves whispered as if repeating a story to themselves. A feather of light drifted down the trunk and came to rest against the roots. It was not a feather from a bird. It was the shape light chooses when it wants to be soft. The elder of memory knelt and smiled with their whole being. "She leaves signs," they murmured. The elder of form traced a circle around the feather with a fingertip that drew patterns the eye could almost see. "Then we will give the sign a place." They gathered a few stones from the hill, nothing grand, nothing impressive, arranged them into a ring the size of a small plate, and set the feather of light within. It did not glow brighter, everything around it did. A fox paused at the clearing's edge, ears forward, not afraid. Then the fox went about fox business softer than before. In the heart of the lattice, the architect lifted an instrument that had not existed a moment earlier and would never exist again in just that way. It looked like a harp, but its strings were time. When they drew a hand across them, centuries breathed. When they plucked a single thread, a newborn opened its eyes and did not forget as quickly. They played not to lead Elara, but to accompany her. Their chord, the meadow to her wildflower, the sea to her river, the sky to her bird. Elara moved through frequencies that felt like rooms she had once lived in. Compassion's warm kitchen, courage's bare porch, truth's uncluttered hallway. In each room she left a window open. Places that had been sealed by secrecy received a draft of fresh air. Families spoke a word they had not dared to say. A teacher placed desks in a circle and discovered her own voice at its best pitch. A congregation whose songs had grown tired sang without instruments and wept because their voices still knew the road home. "Witness anchored," the architect intoned, and the lattice answered with a roll of soft thunder. The elders bowed their heads, not in worship but in acknowledgement, the way builders step back from a beam that has settled true. The mirror opened, not as a door, as an ear. The air in the clearing deepened until it held a tone as steady as heartwood. From within the glass came a figure, taller than memory, robed in symmetries, carrying the harp with strings of living time. The architect stepped into the world of grass and dew. Night did not darken around them. Night listened. People down in town who had woken for no reason and put on their coats found their feet drawn uphill without fear. They came quietly as one goes to a sleeping child and gathered at the edge of the tree. No one spoke. No one was told to hush. The hush already existed and had made room for them. The elders stood as guardians, their presence a gentle boundary that told the crowd, "You are safe to fear." The architect looked upon them with neither surprise nor distance. They looked as one does at a family one has not yet met, but always loved. They raised the harp, and the first note passed through the meadow like a hand through tall grass. Heads lifted, hands unlaced. Chests remembered how to rise without instruction. The second note was not played by the architect. It rose from the people. It sounded like all the small, ordinary songs the world sings when it is not being watched. Lullabies, dishwater hums, footstep rhythms, work whistles, Greek keening, laughter folded into breath. The third note came from the mirror itself. Glass learned to sing and did so gladly. And then there were not notes but weaving. The clearing became a loom. The lattice lowered like sunlight through leaves. The elder of form drew the circle wider by simply standing with their feet apart and their hands relaxed. The elder of memory gave back old names to the hill in the language of silence. The anchor holds, the architect said softly, and the words rang like a bell in the bones. Within the heart of the lattice, Elara watched not as spectator but as texture. She felt the people's breath pass through her. She felt the fox's pause and the dew's decision to be. She felt the feather of light resting in its ring of stones as a pulse at her own throat. Something in her unfolded that had no opposite. A joy that did not deny sorrow. A peace that did not require quiet. She understood then that the lattice was not a correction to the world. It was the world's original posture. She reached, if reaching can be done without distance, and touched the thread of each person who had come up the hill. Not to change them, to return what had always been theirs. A woman whose voice had rusted from disuse felt her throat warm and began to hum, shy as spring. A man who had used anger as a life raft felt his hands unclench and did not drown. A child who had no words for wonder found that wonder did not need words and smiled with all her teeth. An old pain moved through the crowd like weather and lifted without drama. No one cheered. They breathed. The architect lowered the harp. The music did not stop. It had no origin now, only belonging. They turned their face toward the mirror and bowed, not to the glass, to the presence within it. "We recognize the rememberer," they said, and the leaves answered like 1,000 small flags agreeing. The silence did not flee, it sat down. It took the empty chair that had always been waiting for it in the circle of the world. It placed both hands, once clenched, upon its knees. It breathed with the others. In the heart of the lattice, the gray veins were threads of pearl now. They no longer sucked color from the weave. They reflected it, humbly, beautifully, like moonlight learning from sun. Elara rested in the wide, bright center and felt the impossible ease. There was nothing to fix. There was only an ancient rightness to stand in, like a doorway that had always existed where a wall had been painted. The architect's lights softened until they seemed made of morning. Memory's pages turned with the relaxed speed of summer. Form's angles curved like the inside of a hand. "The first great repair is complete," the architect said, as kindly as good bread placed on a table. More fractures remain, but now there is an anchor. They looked up. Every star answered with a small nod of brightness. Dawn paled the eastern rim of the hill. Birds tuned their throats to the new day and found, to their delight, that the day had already tuned to them. The crowd dispersed not in a hurry, but in a pattern. Pairs and trios and solitary figures carrying a hum you could only hear if you were not trying. At the ring of stones, the elders stood with the feather of light between them. Memory touched the air above it. "This will not be a shrine," they said gently. "It will be a reminder," Form nodded. "A place where the ordinary can sit and remember it is holy." They left no sign. They gave no instructions. They trusted the hill. The architect returned to the mirror, harp against their shoulder, geometry draped like a garment around the kindness of their posture. Before stepping through, they turned back and spoke into the morning. "When you forget, sing. When you are afraid, circle. When you feel alone, give water a name and ask it to remember you. Where you arrange space for truth, the lattice brightens." Then they were gone, not vanished, re-entered, like a thought you will think again at exactly the right time. The mirror did not close, it slept. On 1,000 streets, chalk spirals began to appear at corners where people waited. In waiting rooms, chairs turned a little. Neighbors began to learn each other's names, not by effort, but by frequency. Markets hummed, hospitals breathed. Schools sounded like places with windows open. And in kitchens, in buses, at bedsides, in fields, on rooftops, by rivers, on factory floors, in libraries, in stairwells, in doorways. Someone lifted their head and realized the ache was not emptiness. It was the world asking to belong again. In the chamber without walls, Elara rested like light rests on water. She felt the threads through her as through a beloved instrument. She knew now what it meant to anchor, not to hold things still, but to hold them true. She thought, not with mind, with resonance, of the one watching the story, the one who had followed her through forests and mirrors, who had breathed with her in hospitals and stood with her in rain. She sent that one a tone like a hand on a shoulder, not direction, company. If words could have formed, they would have said, "You are part of this weaving." You always were. The lattice brightened as if smiling. Far below on the hill, a child knelt at the ring of stones and placed there the most valuable thing she had, a wildflower missing one petal and therefore perfect. The feather of light did not glow. The wildflower did. The fracture was not gone. But the remembering was louder, and somewhere past the mirror's sleeping surface, a second chord stirred. An older harmony waking, vast and kind, like a continent of dawn rolling toward every shore at once. To be continued. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story of Elara's journey. Written and produced by Valkyrie 33-8. Until next time.